Yes, so we'll be discussing the concept of joint costs and their variances. Now, before we start, we have always found out the input variances. That is as good as saying one finished goods will have raw material 1, raw material 2 and raw material 3, and we were concerned with the raw material ke variances. Now, even in this concept, we will be concerned with the RM variances only. So we are always doing cost variances only as of now. However, this time we will be having one raw material and we will be having 3 or more than 2 finished goods. So this is just an example. So usually what we have is one finished goods and we have raw material 1, raw material 2, raw material 3, and we find raw material ka cost variance, we find raw material ka usage variance, raw material ka rate variance, mix variance. So what should be the mix of the input is the mix variance. Here it is inverse. I have one raw material and I have got 3 finished goods. So there is no raw material mix variance because there is single raw material. So in such cases we will be having joint costs. Since there is one raw material and I can make 3 or more than 2 finished goods, maybe there is a common process. There is a common process from which I am getting 3 or more 2 or more than 2 finished goods. So in such cases, this is how my variances will look like. Let's start. Now, my parent variance will always be the total cost variance. See, I am having one raw materials and 3 finished goods, or I will have one finished goods and 3 raw materials. My cost will always be of raw materials. So that concept will not change here. I am still finding out the cost variances, but now the analysis of cost variance will be a little different now. First is my direct material variances, which means whatever is the cost of the materials that should have been used in the product, that minus my actual cost of materials will be the direct material ka linked variances. Second is the processing cost variance. As I said, there will be one common process through which I will be getting FG1, FG2 and FG3. There are certain costs incurred for processing. So if there is a change in the processing cost, then any variance coming to effect because of the processing cost varying, that will be my processing cost variance. Then the last is my output mix variance. Understand one thing, that here my input is only one. I have one raw material. I have got 3 FGs. So my mix will correspond to the finished goods and not the input mix. So the total cost variance will be nothing but whatever is my actual finished goods, that finished goods ka cost that should have been taken place, that is my parent variance. The parent variance will be different, or parent variance will come into existence because of my cost of RM changing, because of my cost of input processing changing, and because of my different mix of output. It's the first time that we are finding an output mix variance. So this is my concept. We'll discuss this in a little detail right now. Now, okay, I mentioned this to be A, this to be B, this to be C and this to be D, and I will explain one point in detail. So obviously A should be equal to B plus C plus D in terms of variances as usual. Now let us first go in depth as far as total cost variances goes. In such cases, the total variance will always be standard cost less actual cost, that is normal. But the standard cost will be for actual output. This is also normal. We always find out the actual output ke liye the cost that should have been placed. So here that should have taken place. Here my actual output will be 2 or more than 2 goods and my input will be just 1. That's a new thing here. Concept will remain the same. I will always find the standard cost of the actual output. For example, actual output 1 into standard cost per unit, actual output 2 into standard cost per unit, actual output 3 into standard cost per unit. All these 3 outputs are the finished goods. That is because I had one raw material and I had 3 finished goods. So FG1, FG2 and FG3 are my 3 finished goods. These 3 materials, these 3 finished goods ka actual output as I said, the parent variance will always be found for the actual output. So respective actual output into my standard cost per unit. Now standard cost is going to be different for different output. There is FG1, FG2, FG3. Why will all the FGs have same consumption of direct materials? So finished goods is going to have different standard cost. So actual output into standard cost per finished goods will actually give me total standard costs. Up tak we were simply doing actual output into RM cost, but that is because I had only one output. Here I have got three outputs. So all the three outputs into respective DM cost per unit of the finished goods will give me total standard costs. Now, where will the standard cost per unit come from? We will be doing a working note for that. I want the standard cost per unit. How will I get that? Calculation of joint cost. Now standard cost will be a summation of DM cost as well as any processing cost. So input kgs into standard cost of DM. See, input to ek hi hai. I have one input. So that input into the respective price per kg will give me total input cost. The same input into some standard processing cost, 5 rupees per kg, 10 rupees per kg, as the cases, will give me the total standard processing cost. When I add both of them, I'll get total standard cost. This is the standard cost of my inputs. This total standard cost I need to find on a per unit basis of the finished goods. So I need to allocate the total standard cost. See, this is my input price. Once I happen to input materials, I get 3 FGs. So I need to allocate the common cost among FG1, FG2 and FG3, and this is how I'll get the standard cost per unit. So once I get total standard cost, I'll allocate between FG1, FG2, FG3. Now remember, in my inter CA, I had this chapter of joint product byproduct where I used to allocate the cost between sales value method. The sales value method is the most appropriate method to allocate the cost. That is why I will allocate the total standard cost between FG1, FG2 and FG3 on the basis of sales value method. On the basis of sales value method, I'll get the FG1, FG2, FG3 ka allocation. Once I get FG1, 2, 3 ka allocation, divide by respective output standard kgs, I will get the standard cost per unit, and it is this standard cost. It is this standard cost that is going to be used year and year, and this is bound to be different because the allocation will be different. The allocation is different because their respective sales value is different. So I will have different standard cost of FG1, different standard cost of FG2 and different standard cost of FG3, and this is how I will simply get this standard cost. I have simply got the standard cost of the actual output. Actual output will be given for 3 finished goods. Standard cost was not given. We found out total standard cost. Once we found total standard cost of the input, we allocated to FG1, 2 and 3 using sales value method. Once we got the allocation, divide by output, I'll get standard cost. So once I get standard cost, I'll use it year and year, and once I get this, that means I've got this total standard cost, and total standard cost minus my actual cost that will be given. This is my parent variance. So I have just found out the parent variance as total standard cost of all the finished goods minus my total actual cost of all the finished goods. Now I will start the analysis into B, C and D. How will I go ahead? Let's start with the B point. Having understood what the parent variance is, now we will start with the B part. Now B part said direct material cost variances. Understand one thing, that I am having one RM, I am again focusing on the same point. I am having one raw material and one RM is becoming FG1, 2 and 3. So my RM variance will simply be one variance. That is my input number of kgs into the standard cost per kg. So if I should have bought the kgs at 10 rupees per kg, if I have input 10,000 kgs, so 10,000 kgs into 10 rupees per kg is my standard cost. whatever is the actual cost that has to be given in the question. So standard cost of the input minus my actual cost is the direct material cost variance. I do not have 3 raw materials, I have 3 finished goods. So RM will not be RMA, RMB, RMC. A, B and C are my FGs probably. So I am not going to find out the DM variance for FG1, the DM variance for FG2 and the DM variance for FG3. I am just going to find out the total DM variance because it's a joint product question. I do not know how many kgs are actually being used for 1, 2 and 3. I simply input kgs, and once I input kg in the system, I get A, B and C being the outputs. So I don't know how many kg is actually used for A, how many for B, how many for C. That is why I'll simply find out total input variance as what cost has should have taken place for the standards minus my actuals. I'll get my DM variance. So I'll get the first aspect. So whatever is the input into standard cost per kg, and okay, the input is something which has become FG1, 2 and 3. So total input into standard cost minus my actual input cost that will be given, I'll get my DM variance. Moving on to part number C, that is my processing cost variance. Exactly same like my input. Whatever input I had put in the system or whatever input has entered the system, that input into my standard processing cost is my standard processing cost that I should have spent on the actual input. This minus my actual cost that has to be given because we are finding variances, and without the actuals I can't find the variances. So input into the standard processing cost. Note that this was the purchase cost of DM. The purchase manager must have gone to the market to buy direct materials. That is captured here. Once the DM entered the factory, once I should have processed the DM, this is the DM's processing cost being point number C. So this processing cost minus my actual processing cost is my reason of the total cost changing due to processing cost changing. I may have or I should have say spent 5 rupees per kg on processing, but maybe I spent 6 rupees, you never know. So this is the reason of total cost variance due to processing cost changing. The previous was a reason due to me buying at a higher or lower price. So 2 variances are sorted, one for DM, one for processing, and the last. Now since I had 1 RM and I had 3 FGs, I will now not have input mix variance because input we have only 1. We have 3 FGs. So I will have output mix variance, which means actual output will be taken. I will use the standard mix ratio, which means if the actual output has been produced, this is the mix in which the actual output should have been produced. So I will take the actual output, I will use the standard output mix, I will get the output mix that should have taken place minus my actual respective outputs being FG1, FG2, FG3. This will give me the difference in the output quantities and the respective difference in the output quantities into my standard cost. Where is standard cost? I had found a standard cost here. So the output of A that should have been produced minus the output of A that has been produced into my standard cost of output A. This will give me 1 FG's output mix variance. Similarly, the output of B that should have been produced minus the output of B that has been produced into my standard cost of B, and same thing I will do for C, and A plus B plus C will together give me the output mix variance being part number D. So my total cost variance is nothing but the actual output into my standard cost that should have been the cost, and the cost may change or the cost may rise or the cost may fall, either because the material guy has purchased at an expensive price or the processing guy has spent more money on processing goods, or the output mix has changed, and 1 plus 2 plus 3 are reasons because of my total cost variance. That's my concept of joint cost and its variances. Thank you.